To him, failure smelled exactly like stale coffee and industrial bleach. Handed a cardboard box, he learned they weren't just firing him. They were openly laughing at the bruised juice box poking out of his pocket, calling him a pathetic, washed-up single dad. Refusing to yell, he simply took his kid and walked out into the rain, assuming the nightmare was over. He had forgotten, however, one minor detail about Maya's mother. She doesn't forgive, and she owns everything. The fluorescent lights in the data entry department of Omnicorp didn't hum. They rattled. It was a high-pitched metallic vibration that drilled straight into the base of his skull by 3 in the afternoon. Alfred rubbed his eyes. His fingertips felt greasy from the cheap plastic of the keyboard. Spreadsheet after spreadsheet, rows of blue numbers blurring into grey. Underneath his desk, completely silent, was Maya. She was 6. She was currently colouring a picture of a mutated dog on the back of an old invoice, using a purple crayon worn down to a blunt nub. He could smell the waxy scent of it, mixing with the damp wool of her winter coat that he had draped over his chair. The babysitter, Mrs. Gable, had fallen and twisted her ankle that morning. He had exactly $12 in his checking account and a mountain of final notices piled on his kitchen counter. Taking a sick day wasn't an option. So, Maya became a stowaway in cubicle 42. "Keep your knees tucked in, Peanut," he whispered, not taking his eyes off the monitor. She offered a tiny, affirming sniffle. Then came the squeak. It was the distinct, wet rubber friction of expensive loafers, dragging across cheap commercial carpet. Gregson. His stomach dropped, a cold, heavy stone settling in his gut. Gregson was the regional manager. He was a man who sweated constantly, a sheen of moisture perpetually trapped above his upper lip, masking the overpowering stench of his discount sandalwood cologne. "Alfred," Gregson barked. He didn't say it like a name. He said it like a cough. Alfred stood up, adjusting his tie. It was a clip-on. The real ones felt like nooses. "Yes, Mr. Gregson. I'm just finishing the quarterly reconciliation for the—" "Save it." Gregson leaned into his cubicle. His breath smelled like peppermint and stale cigars. His eyes, small and watery, darted over his desk. "Productivity is down 4% in your sector. 4%. Do you know what that does to my bonuses, Alfred? I can stay late tonight to make up the margin. The servers were lagging this morning and—" "Servers, right." Gregson let out a short, nasal laugh. He stepped closer. Then he looked down. Maya had let out a small sneeze. The sound was microscopic, but in the sterile silence of the data floor, it was a gunshot. Gregson's face contorted. He slowly bent down, peering under the particle board desk. Maya looked up at him, her large brown eyes wide, clutching her purple crayon like a tiny weapon. "Well, well, well." Gregson straightened up, his face flushing a mottled pink. He turned to the rest of the floor. Keyboards had stopped clicking. Heads were popping up over the grey dividers like prairie dogs. "I see," Gregson said, his voice carrying over the silence. "Omnicorp is now running a subsidized daycare. Is that it, Alfred?" "My sitter had a medical emergency." Alfred kept his voice low, begging tone, the tone he hated. "It's a one-time situation. She's completely quiet." "Quiet?" Gregson barked. "She's an insurance liability. This is a corporate environment, not a halfway house for single dads who can't get their domestic lives in order." A few snickers drifted from the adjacent cubicles. Alfred felt the blood rushing to his ears. His jaw locked. He wanted to reach across the desk, grab the lapels of his shiny polyblend suit and slam him into the drywall. But he didn't. He looked at Maya, who had shrunk back against his trash can. He looked at the eviction notice folded in his back pocket. He swallowed. The click in his throat felt like swallowing broken glass. "I apologize," he said, his voice completely devoid of life. "I'll take her to the break room until 5. "No, you won't," Gregson smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who finally found a bug he could legally squash. "You're done, Alfred. Pack it up. You're fired." The words hung in the air. The rattling of the fluorescent lights suddenly seemed deafening. "Gregson, please," Alfred said. The desperation leaked out. He hated himself for it. "I need this job. I need the medical benefits. It's just me and her. Should have thought of that before you decided to play house on company time," he sneered, turning his back. "Box up your desk. I want your keycard in 10 minutes, and get that kid out of my sight before I call building security." He walked away, the wet squeak of his loafers slowly fading. Alfred stood there for a long moment. No one looked at him. The clicking of the keyboards resumed, a frantic, desperate sound as everyone rushed to prove they were working. He reached under the desk and pulled Maya out. She wrapped her arms around his leg. "Are we going home, Daddy?" she whispered. "Yeah, baby," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "We're going home." He found an empty copy paper box near the printer. He threw in his coffee mug, chipped at the rim, a handful of pens, and a framed photo of Maya from her 3rd birthday. That was it. 5 years at Omnicorp, and it didn't even fill half a box. He took Maya's hand. They walked down the center aisle. Gregson was standing by the water cooler, chatting with one of the floor supervisors. As he passed, Gregson pointed at the bruised, generic brand juice box sticking out of the side pocket of his worn briefcase. "Look at him," Gregson chuckled loudly. "Can't even afford real apple juice. Pathetic. Good luck paying rent with crayons, Dad." Alfred didn't stop. He pushed open the heavy glass doors, the cold air conditioning giving way to the muggy heat of the city street. He threw the box in the nearest dumpster, keeping only the photo. He picked Maya up, resting her chin on his shoulder. She was getting too heavy to carry, but he needed the physical weight of her against him. He needed to know she was there. The bus ride home took 40 minutes. The heater was broken, blowing lukewarm, exhaust-scented air onto his shins. The rain had started, smearing the grime on the windows into long grey streaks. Maya fell asleep against his ribs, her breathing heavy and rhythmic. Their apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled permanently of boiled cabbage and wet dog. The elevator hadn't worked since October. He carried her up the stairs, his knees popping in the damp stairwell. Inside, the silence was suffocating. He laid Maya on her small bed in the alcove, pulling the faded dinosaur blanket over her shoulders. He stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching her chest rise and fall. He went to the kitchen. The linoleum was peeling at the corners, sticky beneath his socks, no matter how many times he mopped it. He opened the fridge, a jar of mayonnaise, half a loaf of bread, a single slice of processed cheese wrapped in plastic. The compressor buzzed loudly, a mechanical death rattle. He leaned against the counter and rubbed his face until the skin burned. Fired. Alfred did the math in his head. He had severance coming, maybe. But Gregson would likely code it as a termination for cause to screw him out of the payout. Rent was due in 4 days. The lights would be cut on Tuesday. His gaze drifted to the bottom drawer of the kitchen island. The drawer that stuck. The one that held old batteries, takeout menus, and a heavy black burner phone. He walked over and pulled the drawer open. It screeched against the wooden runners. He pushed aside a stack of napkins and picked up the phone. It was cold, heavy. 4 years. He hadn't turned it on in 4 years. Claire. Whenever he thought of her, his chest tightened. It wasn't a flutter of romance. It was the clamping of a vice. Claire wasn't a memory. She was a force of nature. They had met in college. She was brilliant, driven, and completely ruthless. He was the grounding wire. When she started her first tech acquisition firm, he handled the logistics. He made sure she ate. He made sure she slept. But then the buyouts got aggressive. The money got too big. Enemies started appearing. Not the kind who sue you, but the kind who freeze your assets and send men in suits to sit outside your house in unmarked cars. When Maya was 2, a brick came through her bedroom window with a threat wrapped around it. Claire had looked at the brick, then looked at him, her eyes completely devoid of panic. It was terrifying. She didn't see a threat to their child. She saw a tactical vulnerability. "Take her," Claire had said that night, packing a duffel bag with cash. "Go somewhere quiet. Let me finish this. I have to tear them down to the studs, Alfred. I can't do it if I'm worried about you two." He left. He changed his last name. He took low-level jobs. He disappeared into the grey machinery of the lower middle class, trading ambition for safety. They agreed. 0 contact until she sent word that the boardrooms were clean and the wolves were dead. She had built an empire while he was scrubbing coffee stains out of polyblend carpets. He knew it. He occasionally saw her name on the covers of magazines in the grocery checkout lines. Claire Sterling, the iron architect of Wall Street, the billionaire shadow. He promised himself he would never call. He wanted Maya to have a dad, not a pawn in a corporate war. But he looked at the eviction notice. He looked at the empty fridge. He pressed the power button. The screen glowed a harsh, ugly green in the dim kitchen. The battery was at 6%. There was only 1 contact saved. C. He pressed dial. He put it to his ear. It didn't ring. It was an encrypted line, just silence, a soft click, and then the beep of an automated voicemail. He didn't have a speech prepared. He didn't want to beg. His throat felt thick, choked with the ash of his own pride. "It's Alfred," he said to the empty kitchen. His voice was a gravelly whisper. "I lost the job. Gregson at Omnicorp. I don't have rent. The fridge is empty, Claire. I failed." He hung up. He dropped the phone back into the drawer and slammed it shut. He slid down the front of the cabinets until he was sitting on the sticky linoleum. He pulled his knees to his chest and buried his face in his arms. He stayed there until the rain stopped. The next morning tasted like burnt toast and anxiety. Alfred dressed in his only clean shirt, a pale blue button-down frayed at the cuffs. He had to go back to Omnicorp. HR policy dictated that final severance paperwork had to be signed in person, physically handing over the corporate ID to receive the final check. He needed that check. Even if it was a fraction of what he was owed, it was groceries for the week. He dropped Maya off at Mrs. Gable's apartment down the hall. Her ankle was wrapped in an ace bandage, and she looked at him with pity. He hated the pity. The walk to the corporate plaza was suffocating. The morning sun was blinding, reflecting off the glass facades of the downtown high-rises. Omnicorp's lobby was a monument to cheap intimidation. Faux granite walls, polished concrete floors, and a reception desk shaped like the prow of a ship. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah who was perpetually chewing cinnamon gum, looked up as he approached. "Alfred," she said, popping a bubble. She actually looked sympathetic. "I heard. Rough break." "Just need to see HR, Sarah. Got the paperwork." Before she could page them, the elevator doors at the back of the lobby chimed. Out stepped Gregson. He was flanked by 2 floor supervisors. He was holding a large iced coffee, looking incredibly pleased with himself. When he saw Alfred, his smile widened, exposing small greying teeth. "Well, look who came crawling back," Gregson said, his voice echoing off the hard surfaces of the lobby. He strolled over, sipping his drink. "Forget something, Alfred? Maybe a stray pacifier?" Alfred kept his eyes level. "I'm here for my check, Gregson. Just sign the release." "Oh, the release," Gregson chuckled, leaning against the reception desk. "See, I reviewed your logs last night. You were vastly underperforming. I'm categorizing your termination as gross negligence. That means no severance. HR is just going to give you a summary of your denied benefits." His vision blurred at the edges. "You can't do that. I did the work. You fired me for my kid being there." "I fired you because you're useless," Gregson snapped, dropping the smile. "You're a distraction, a charity case, and Omnicorp isn't a charity." Alfred balled his fists. He was going to hit him. The consequences didn't matter anymore. The electric hum of adrenaline was flooding his veins. But before he could move, the sound began. It started as a deep, resonant rumble, vibrating through the thick glass of the lobby windows. The crunch of heavy tires on the decorative gravel driveway outside. Sarah stopped chewing her gum. Gregson turned around, frowning. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass doors, they saw them. 4 black SUVs. They weren't just luxury cars, they were heavy, military-grade armored vehicles. Matte black, tinted windows as dark as obsidian. They rolled to a synchronized, aggressive halt right in the fire lane, completely blocking the entrance to the building. The lobby fell dead silent. The only sound was the low, idling growl of the massive engines. "What is this?" Gregson muttered, spilling a little of his iced coffee on his cuff. "Hey, you can't park there. Sarah, call security." The doors of the SUVs opened simultaneously. 8 men stepped out. They wore tailored charcoal suits, but the way they moved wasn't corporate. It was tactical. They were thick-necked, their eyes scanning the plaza behind dark glasses. They took up positions around the entrance, facing outward. Then the rear door of the second vehicle opened. The heavy armored door closed with a deep, metallic thud that Alfred felt in his chest. She stepped onto the pavement. Claire. She looked exactly the same, yet entirely different. She wore a sharp, immaculate white suit that practically glowed in the morning sun. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, flawless knot. But it was her posture that took the air out of the room. She stood like she owned the pavement beneath her feet. She smelled of ozone, wealth, and impending violence. She walked toward the glass doors. 2 of her men smoothly opened them for her, stepping back. She stepped into the lobby. Her heels clicked against the polished concrete, a sharp, rhythmic, terrifying sound. Gregson puffed out his chest, stepping forward to intercept her. "Excuse me, ma'am. You can't just storm in here. This is a private—" Claire didn't look at him. She didn't even acknowledge his existence. She kept walking until she stopped exactly 3 feet in front of Alfred. She slowly took off her sunglasses. Her eyes, pale and sharp as shattered ice, locked onto his. "Alfred," she said. Her voice was smooth, quiet, but it carried a weight that made the hair on his arms stand up. "Claire," he whispered. She looked at his frayed cuffs. She looked at the dark circles under his eyes. A tiny muscle feathered in her jaw. "You left a message," she said. Before Alfred could answer, Gregson, red-faced and sweating profusely, shoved his way between them. "Listen, lady, I don't care who you think you are, but you are interrupting my lobby, and you are talking to a terminated, disgruntled employee. Security is on the way." Claire slowly turned her head to look at Gregson. She looked at him the way one looks at a smear of mud on an expensive shoe. "Who?" Claire asked, her voice dropping 10 degrees. "Are you?" "I am the regional director of this branch," Gregson yelled, pointing a stubby finger at her, "and I want you out." Claire didn't blink. She didn't raise her voice. She reached into her blazer, pulled out a sleek silver phone, and pressed a single button. "Bring the board," she said into it. She hung up. She looked back at Gregson. "You were the regional director, past tense." "Excuse me?" Gregson scoffed, though his voice wavered slightly at the coldness in her eyes. "You don't have the authority to—" "Omnicorp was acquired at 6 a.m. this morning," Claire interrupted, her tone flat and lethal. "A hostile takeover. Cash. I bought the debt. I bought the building. I own the chairs. I own the servers. And until I fire you in about 30 seconds, I own you." Gregson's face went completely white. The iced coffee slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor, brown liquid splashing across the polished concrete. Claire turned her back to him, facing Alfred again. Her eyes softened, just a fraction. Just enough for him to see the woman who used to share a tiny dorm bed with him, tracing lines on his palm. "Where is she?" Claire asked, her voice trembling just once. "Where is my daughter?" The iced coffee pooled around the toes of Gregson's cheap leather shoes, a brown, spreading stain of defeat. He didn't move. He didn't speak. His mouth hung slightly open, a thin thread of saliva catching in the corner of his lips. The bluster, the arrogance, it had evaporated in 3 seconds flat. Alfred didn't look at him. His eyes were locked on Claire. "She's safe," he said. His voice sounded thin in the massive, echoing lobby. He cleared his throat, hating how defensive he felt. "She's with the neighbor, a few blocks from here." Claire exhaled. It was a jagged, imperfect sound. For a fraction of a second, the billionaire vanished, and he saw the exhausted college kid who used to fall asleep on his chest while cramming for economics finals. Then the mask snapped back into place. Hard, smooth, impenetrable. A man in a charcoal suit, the one closest to the door, stepped forward, his hand resting casually near his waist. "Ma'am, we need to clear the perimeter. Too many windows here." "Right," Claire said, her voice brisk again. She turned her head slightly toward the receptionist's desk. Sarah had stopped chewing her gum completely, her eyes wide as saucers. "You," Claire said. Sarah jumped. "Yes, ma'am. Find the head of human resources. Tell them to process a full, unmitigated severance package for Alfred. Maximum payout. 5 years back pay, adjusted for market inflation. If they argue, tell them they are fired, and the person beneath them will do it. Am I clear?" "Crystal, ma'am," Sarah squeaked. "You didn't have to buy the company, Claire," Alfred said quietly, the anger finally starting to burn through the shock. It wasn't a heroic anger. It was a petty, humiliated anger. He had spent 4 years eating dirt to survive, and she just snapped her fingers and bought the dirt. "It was faster," she replied, her pale eyes meeting his. "And I don't like people who threaten what belongs to me." She didn't look at Gregson again. She simply turned and walked toward the glass doors. The tactical men parted like water. Alfred stood there for a second, the broken coffee cup at his feet, the fluorescent lights suddenly feeling very distant. He realized his hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the massive, crashing tidal wave of adrenaline leaving his system. "Alfred," Claire called out. She was standing by the open door of the massive black SUV. The leather interior smelled like fresh rain and kerosene. "Get in." He looked at Gregson one last time. He looked like a deflated balloon. He didn't feel triumphant. He just felt tired. He walked out of the Omnicorp building, out of the sterile air conditioning, and into the damp, heavy heat of the city. He climbed into the back of the SUV. The heavy door slammed shut behind him with a vacuum-sealed thump. The silence inside was absolute. No traffic noise, no honking. Just the low, powerful thrum of an engine that felt like it belonged in a tank. Claire sat across from him on the plush leather bench. There was a console between them, polished wood and brushed steel. She pressed a button, and the tinted glass divider between them and the driver rolled up, sealing them in completely. "Give him the address," she said, looking straight ahead. He hesitated, then leaned over and tapped the intercom button. He rattled off the address of the crumbling brick building on 114th Street. The convoy moved. It didn't just drive, it dominated the lanes. Other cars instinctively pulled away, intimidated by the sheer, blunt force aggression of the 4 black vehicles. Claire didn't look at him. She stared out the heavily tinted window, her jaw set tightly. Her hands, resting in her lap, were completely still. Too still. 4 years, Alfred, she finally said. Her voice was barely a whisper. 4 years and not a single call. I didn't even know if you were alive until you left that voicemail. That was the deal, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. His fraying collar felt rough against his skin. You said go dark. You said it wasn't safe until you sent word. I never got the word, Claire. She closed her eyes. A muscle twitched in her cheek. I couldn't. It took longer than I thought to bury them. The people who threw that brick, they weren't just competitors. They were predators. I had to become something worse to break them. If I had reached out, if I had sent anyone to check on you, they would have found the trail. So you just left us in the wind. I protected you, she snapped, her eyes flying open, flashing with sudden defensive heat. I gave you $2 million in untraceable cash in that duffel bag. You were supposed to go to Europe, to disappear comfortably. Alfred let out a short, harsh laugh. It sounded like a cough. Right, the duffel bag. Claire frowned, leaning forward slightly. The pristine white fabric of her suit rustled. What happened to the money, Alfred? I burned it, he said, looking out the window at the blurry, grey city sliding by. Figuratively. 6 months in, I noticed a guy in a grey sedan following us. He had the same dead eyes as the guys who used to park outside our old house. The cash had a tracker in the lining, Claire. Or the bag did. I didn't stick around to figure it out. I dumped the bag, took the $500 I had in my wallet, and vanished. For real this time. Claire stopped breathing. She stared at him, the blood slowly draining from her face, leaving her looking like a marble statue. You've been living on nothing, she whispered, horrified. For 3.5 years. I've been living, he corrected, his tone hardening. I kept her safe. I kept her fed. Mostly. The SUV hit a pothole, the massive suspension absorbing the shock until it was nothing but a gentle sway. They were turning onto 114th Street. The scenery had shifted from towering glass financial buildings to pawn shops, boarded-up bodegas, and sagging power lines. Claire looked out the window at the neighborhood. Alfred saw her grip the edge of the leather seat until her knuckles turned white. "Stop the car!" she commanded into the intercom. They rolled to a halt in front of his building. The brickwork was stained black with decades of exhaust. A pile of garbage bags leaked brown fluid onto the cracked sidewalk. "We're here," he said, grabbing the door handle. Claire didn't move. She stared at the building. The iron architect of Wall Street, the woman who had just hostile taken a corporation before breakfast, looked paralyzed. "Alfred," she said, her voice cracking. It was the first time he heard genuine terror in her tone. "Does she even remember me?" He looked back at her. He didn't want to lie, but he also didn't want to break her. "She's 6, Claire. We'll find out." The tactical team wanted to clear the building first. Claire told them to stand down with a sharpness that made the lead guy flinch. She ordered them to wait by the cars. Only one man, a tall, quiet guy with a scarred chin who looked more like a shadow than a person, followed them up. The stairwell smelled intensely of boiled cabbage and old mop water. It was suffocatingly humid. The elevator doors on the ground floor were pried halfway open, a yellow out-of-order sign taped haphazardly to the metal. Claire walked in front of him, her white heels clicking against the scuffed, uneven linoleum of the stairs. With every floor, the grime seemed to cling to her pristine suit, a harsh contrast between the world she built and the world she forced them into. By the 3rd floor, she stopped. She gripped the rusted iron handrail, breathing heavily. Not from the exertion, but from the panic. "It's just one more flight," Alfred said softly, standing a few steps below her. She turned her head. Her immaculate bun was slightly loose now, a single dark strand falling across her pale cheek. "How did you do this, Alfred? How did you walk up these stairs every day?" "You put one foot in front of the other," he said, his voice devoid of poetry. "And you don't look down." They reached the 4th floor. The hallway lighting was a sickly, flickering yellow. He walked past his apartment, door 4B, where the eviction notice was still taped firmly to the peeling wood, and stopped at 4D. He knocked twice. A pause, then 3 rapid knocks. The code. He heard the scraping of a deadbolt, then the rattle of a chain lock. The door opened a crack, revealing Mrs. Gable's watery blue eye and the overwhelming smell of Bengay ointment and daytime television. "Alfred," she rasped. "It's me, Mrs. G. I came to get Maya." She undid the chain and swung the door open, leaning heavily on an aluminum cane. Her eyes darted from his frayed shirt to Claire. She took in the white suit, the diamonds at Claire's earlobes, and the massive, silent shadow standing a few feet down the hall. Mrs. Gable clutched her floral robe tighter around her neck. "Is there trouble, Alfred?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't want no trouble with the police." "No police, Mrs. Gable. She's family." He stepped past her into the cramped, overheated apartment. The television was blaring a game show. The air was thick with dust motes dancing in the slanted shafts of light, fighting through the dingy window blinds. Maya was sitting cross-legged on a threadbare rug in the center of the room. She had her dinosaur blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a cape. She was meticulously coloring on a fresh piece of printer paper. "Hey, Peanut," he said, crouching down. Maya dropped the crayon and scrambled to her feet. "Daddy!" She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. She smelled like cheap strawberry shampoo and dust. "You came back early. Did the mean, sweaty man yell again?" His chest tightened. "No, baby. I'm done with the sweaty man. We're going on a trip." He stood up, holding her on his hip. She was heavy, but he anchored her there. He turned around. Claire was standing just inside the doorway. The shadow man had closed the door behind her. Maya stopped squirming. She stared at the stranger in the bright white clothes. To a kid who lived in a world of grey cubicles and yellowed hallways, Claire looked like an alien. Claire took a tentative step forward. Her hands were shaking violently now. She reached out, then pulled her hand back, as if she were afraid Maya would shatter upon contact. "Hi, Maya," Claire whispered. Her voice broke completely. A tear, thick and hot, spilled over her lashes and cut a shining path down her cheek. Maya tightened her grip on his shirt collar. She looked at him, her brown eyes wide with confusion. "Daddy, why is the lady crying?" It was a simple question. It felt like a knife twisting in his ribs. He looked at Claire. The billionaire CEO was gone. In her place was a broken, terrified mother, realizing she was nothing but a stranger to her own blood. "Maya," he said gently, keeping his voice steady and low. "Do you remember the stories I told you? About the brave lady who had to go fight dragons so we could be safe?" Maya blinked, looking back at Claire. "The Iron Lady?" "Yeah, the Iron Lady." He stepped closer to Claire. "She finished fighting the dragons. She came to find us." Maya stared. The silence in Mrs. Gable's apartment stretched, heavy and tense, save for the tinny applause of the game show on the television. Claire dropped to her knees. She didn't care about the dirty linoleum. She didn't care about the dust. She just fell to the floor, so she was at eye level with the child she hadn't held in 4 years. "I brought something for you," Claire said, her voice shaking uncontrollably. She reached into the pocket of her blazer with trembling fingers. She pulled out a small, worn object. It was a stuffed, faded yellow fabric star. Maya's first teething toy. "You left it," Claire choked out, holding the star in her open palm. "The night you had to go away. I kept it in my pocket, every single day. I'm sorry it took so long, Maya. I am so sorry." Maya looked at the star. Then she looked at Claire's face. Kids don't understand corporate takeovers or encrypted burners, but they understand grief. They understand when an adult is completely and utterly destroyed. Maya slowly reached out and took the star from Claire's palm. Then, with the quiet, devastating empathy that only a child possesses, Maya unwrapped her faded dinosaur blanket from her shoulders. She stepped out of his arms, walked over to Claire, and draped the blanket over Claire's shaking shoulders. "Don't cry," Maya whispered, patting Claire's pristine white sleeve with a dirt-smudged hand. "You're safe now. The dragons are gone," Claire broke. She let out a sob that sounded like something tearing inside her chest. She wrapped her arms around Maya, burying her face in the child's messy hair, clutching her like a lifeline. She didn't wail. She just held on, shaking violently beneath the dinosaur blanket, crying silently into the dust and the cheap strawberry shampoo. Alfred stood above them. He felt the burn behind his own eyes, but he didn't let it fall. He couldn't. He had spent 4 years being the wall between them and the world. The wall doesn't get to crumble. He looked at the shadow man standing by the door. He was respectfully staring at the ceiling, pretending he didn't see the iron architect falling apart on a sticky floor. "Give us 5 minutes," he said to him. His voice was hard, returning to the cynical rhythm of survival. "Then we're out of here." Packing took exactly 4 minutes. There wasn't much to take. 2 trash bags of clothes, a box of Maya's drawing supplies, and the few battered pots and pans he couldn't bear to leave behind. Claire's men carried the bags down the stairs like they were handling hazardous materials. Claire carried Maya. She refused to put her down, even when Maya started to doze off, lulled by the gentle hum of the heavy armoured SUV. The ride away from 114th Street was different. The tension had shifted. The initial shock of the reunion was fading, replaced by a cold, creeping reality. They were leaving Alfred's squalor, yes, but where were they going? "The estate is fully secure," Claire said quietly, brushing a strand of hair away from Maya's sleeping face. She had wiped away the mascara streaks, the cold, composed mask slipping back into place. "Biometric locks, reinforced perimeter, a 24-hour detail. You won't ever have to look over your shoulder again, Alfred." Alfred stared out the tinted glass. They were crossing the bridge, leaving the grit of the city for the sprawling, manicured hills of the outer suburbs. A 24-hour detail, he repeated. The words tasted like ash. Armed guards, reinforced perimeters. Sounds like a prison, Claire. Just a very expensive one. She frowned, looking up at him. It's a sanctuary. I built it for us. The people who came after us. I neutralized the leaders, yes. But nature abhors a vacuum. There are always ambitious scavengers. I have enemies, Alfred. A lot of them. I won't risk her. Not ever again. So she trades a decaying apartment for a gilded bunker. She trades coloring on old invoices for drawing under the supervision of mercenaries. He turned to face her, the anger simmering again. Is she ever going to a normal school? Is she ever going to play in a park without a sniper on a roof? She will have the best tutors in the world, Claire fired back, her tone sharp, defensive. She will want for nothing. I own the world, Alfred. I bought it so she wouldn't have to fear it. You bought it, he agreed softly, leaning back against the leather. But who's the warden? Claire opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. They pulled off the main highway, turning onto a private, winding road lined with ancient oaks. The trees blocked out the afternoon sun, casting long, imposing shadows over the black convoy. Ahead, massive wrought-iron gates stood between towering stone pillars. As they approached, they swung open silently, revealing a sprawling, ultra-modern compound of glass, steel, and dark slate. It was stunning. It was brutalist. It looked completely devoid of warmth. The SUV glided up the circular driveway and stopped. The doors opened. The humid air of the outside world was replaced by the hyper-filtered, chilled air of the estate. They walked inside. The foyer was vast, paved in black marble that mirrored the cathedral ceilings. Their footsteps echoed like gunshots. It smelled like lemon oil and ozone. Maya woke up, rubbing her eyes. She looked around the massive, empty space, her grip on Claire's hand tightening. "Daddy?" she called out, her voice echoing too loudly. "It's too big." "I know, Peanut," he said, stepping closer to her. Claire looked pained. "It's just new, sweetheart. There are playrooms and a pool. You can have anything you want." Alfred looked at Claire. She was trying so hard, but she was applying boardroom logic to a terrified child. "Claire," he said, keeping his voice low. "Can we talk? Alone? Just for a second?" He motioned to the shadow man, who was standing like a statue by the door. He stepped forward, gently offering his hand to Maya. "I can show you where the kitchen is, little one. The chef makes excellent chocolate chip cookies." Maya looked at him for permission. He nodded. She took the man's massive hand and walked down a long, echoing hallway. When they were gone, he turned to Claire. She was standing in the center of the vast marble floor, looking incredibly small despite the empire she had built. "I need ground rules," he said. Her spine stiffened. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." He stepped forward, closing the distance. "I survived for 4 years. I kept her alive when we had nothing. I am not trading one dictator for another. I am not an employee, Claire. You can't hostile take over me." Her eyes narrowed. "I'm trying to protect you. Both of you." "By suffocating us?" he countered. "I appreciate the extraction. I really do. I was drowning today. But I know you, Claire. You control everything. You bought my company just to fire my boss. That's power. It's terrifying power. And if you point that power at Maya, if you try to control her life like you control your stock portfolios, I will take her and walk out that reinforced door." And you won't find us next time. Claire stared at him. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. The anger flared in her eyes, the familiar, brilliant fire that made her so lethal in negotiations. But then, slowly, the fire died. She looked at the floor, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know how to do this," she confessed, the whisper echoing off the high ceilings. "I know how to destroy monopolies. I know how to crush men who try to extort me. I don't know how to be a mother. I'm terrified, Alfred. I built all this, and I'm terrified I'm going to break her." Alfred looked at her, really looked at her. Beneath the white suit and the billions of dollars, she was just as scared as he was when Gregson handed him that cardboard box. He took a step forward. He didn't hug her. They weren't there yet. The chasm between them was 4 years of poverty and billions of dollars wide. But he reached out and put his hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to be a CEO here," he said quietly, feeling the tension in her muscles through the fabric. "You just have to be Claire. We'll figure out the rest. But it happens together. No executive orders." She looked up at him, the shattered ice in her eyes melting just a fraction. She gave a small, jerky nod. "Together," she echoed softly. From down the hall, they heard a sudden bright sound. It was Maya. She was laughing at something the Shadow Man had said. It was a loud, uninhibited sound that bounced off the cold marble walls, instantly making the massive estate feel a little less like a fortress and a little more like a home. The war was over. But looking around the sterile, echoing halls of their new gilded cage, Alfred knew the real fight, the fight for a normal life, was just beginning. Alfred didn't sleep for the first 3 weeks. The bed in his designated guest suite was a sprawling landscape of Egyptian cotton and memory foam. It cost more than the collective rent of everyone on his old floor at 114th Street. He hated it. It didn't support him. It swallowed him. He spent most nights lying on top of the covers in his sweatpants, staring at the ceiling, listening to the absolute, terrifying absence of noise. In the apartment, silence was a myth. There was always the radiator hissing, the upstairs neighbors arguing, the distant wail of a siren. Those sounds were his radar. They told him the world was still spinning. Here, the HVAC system was soundless. The triple-paned glass blocked out the wind. The silence felt heavy, like deep water pressing against his eardrums. He became a ghost haunting a museum. During the day, the estate operated with terrifying efficiency. A silent army of staff in grey uniforms kept the marble polished and the refrigerators stocked with alkaline water and organic fruit. He didn't know their names. They averted their eyes when he walked past. Claire was a phantom of another sort. She left the compound at 5:30 a.m. in a black car and returned well past dark, retreating to a study locked behind a retina scanner. When she was around, she treated Maya with a brittle, desperate enthusiasm. She brought gifts, ridiculous things. A hand-carved rocking horse imported from Sweden. A bespoke silk wardrobe that Maya refused to wear because the tags scratched her neck. Alfred watched it all happen from the periphery, his jaw locked. He was the father, but he felt like a spectator who had accidentally wandered onto a movie set. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday morning. The air smelled of rain and espresso. He walked into the kitchen, a massive expanse of stainless steel and black granite that looked more like an operating room than a place to cook. Maya was sitting at the island, kicking her legs. A man in a pristine white chef's coat was placing a bowl in front of her. "Deconstructed Gruyere and truffle macaroni, young miss," the chef said, his accent vaguely European, his tone entirely patronizing. Maya stared at the bowl. It held 5 perfectly uniform, oversized noodles swimming in a pale, pungent sauce, topped with shaved black fungus. She looked up at him, her lower lip trembling. "Daddy," she whispered, "it smells like dirty feet." The chef stiffened, his face flushing. "I assure you, sir, the truffles are flown in fresh from Alba. It is a delicacy." "She's 6, pal," he said, leaning against the doorframe. His worn grey t-shirt felt out of place against the gleaming appliances. "She likes her cheese to be the colour of a traffic cone." Mrs. Clare instructed me to expand her palate, to prepare her for society dinners. "Did she?" He pushed off the doorframe and walked over to the island. The smell of the truffle oil was cloying, coating the back of his throat. He picked up the porcelain bowl. It was heavy, hot to the touch. He dumped the contents straight into the stainless steel trash chute. The expensive noodles hit the bottom with a wet smack. The chef gasped. "Sir, that is a $50 dish." "Take the rest of the day off," he said, not looking at him. "I answer to Ms. Clare." Alfred turned slowly. The cynical, exhausted survivor in him, the guy who spent 4 years looking over his shoulder for hitmen and eviction notices, flared to life. "You answer to whoever writes the checks, and right now, she's not here," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, dangerous pitch. "I am. This is my kid. You're trying to feed her fungus because her mother is having a panic attack about high society. Get out of the kitchen before I fire you myself." The chef stared at him, evaluating the threat. He saw the bags under Alfred's eyes and the tension in his shoulders. He untied his apron, threw it over a stool, and marched out of the room. He turned to Maya. She was grinning. "All right, Peanut," he said, clapping his hands together, the sharp sound cutting through the sterile kitchen. "Let's find the cheap stuff." It took 10 minutes of rummaging through a walk-in pantry the size of his old bedroom, past rows of quinoa and imported tapenades, to find it. Hidden on the bottom shelf, behind a bag of flaxseed, was a single, glorious blue box of generic macaroni and cheese. They dragged a step stool over to the industrial 6-burner stove. He filled a copper pot with water. Maya helped him tear the cardboard box open. "Don't lose the cheese dust," he warned her, tapping her nose with a finger. "It's the magic dust," she agreed solemnly. When the water boiled, they dumped the noodles in. He didn't use a timer. He just knew when it was done. They drained it, threw in a massive, unapologetic chunk of butter, and ripped open the foil packet. The smell hit the air instantly. Salty, artificial, aggressively neon. It smelled like Tuesday nights on 114th Street. It smelled like survival. Maya stirred it with a wooden spoon, the orange powder turning into a thick, sticky paste. She slopped a huge spoonful onto a plate, getting a smear of neon orange on the pristine black granite counter. "Oops," she said, freezing. "Leave it," he said. "This place needs some color." They sat on the heated floor tiles, their backs against the cold stainless steel cabinets, eating the cheap pasta out of regular bowls. It burned the roof of his mouth. It tasted like heaven. They were laughing at a joke about a penguin when he heard the sharp, rhythmic click of heels on the marble floor of the hallway. Claire stopped in the doorway. She was wearing a charcoal pantsuit, holding a leather briefcase. She looked at the abandoned chef's apron. She looked at the smear of bright orange cheese on her $10,000 countertop. Then she looked down at them, sitting on the floor like refugees. "What happened?" she asked. Her voice was tight, her eyes darting around the room, assessing the damage like a crime scene. "Where is Laurent? Is the stove okay?" "Laurent is taking a personal day," he said, scraping the bottom of his bowl with his spoon. It made an awful, scratching noise. "And the stove is fine. It boils water just like the broken one in my old place. Claire set her briefcase down. She rubbed her temples. Alfred, please. I hired him to ensure she gets proper nutrition. You can't just run off my staff. She didn't want truffles, Claire. She wanted macaroni. So you sit on the floor and stain the granite? She walked over, grabbing a microfiber cloth from the sink, furiously scrubbing at the orange smear. Her knuckles were white. This stone is porous, Alfred. It stains easily. You have to be careful. Alfred watched her scrub, the frantic, jerky motion of her arm. She wasn't scrubbing the cheese. She was trying to scrub away the messiness of them. Stop it, he said quietly. She ignored me, rubbing harder, her breath coming in short, harsh gasps. If you let it sit, it ruins the finish. It ruins everything. I just need it to be perfect. Why can't you just let me make it perfect? Claire, stop. He stood up, walked over, and gently wrapped his hand over hers, halting the cloth. Her skin was freezing. She froze, staring at the granite. It's a kitchen, he said, his voice softer now. It's not a museum exhibit. It's supposed to have stains. It means someone actually lives here. She slowly looked up at him. Her pale eyes were glassy, brimming with unshed tears. The iron architect was crumbling, just like she had in Mrs. Gable's apartment. I don't know what I'm doing, she whispered, the cloth dropping from her hand. I leave before she wakes up because I'm terrified I'll say the wrong thing. I buy her things because I don't know how to talk to her. She looked at me yesterday like I was a stranger, because I am. I bought the company, I built the fortress, and I am still just a stranger to my own daughter. A heavy silence settled over the kitchen, broken only by the soft, rhythmic hum of the massive refrigerators. Alfred looked down at Maya. She was sitting on the floor, watching them with wide, observant eyes, a noodle stuck to her chin. She doesn't care about the fortress, he said, turning back to Claire. He let go of her hand, but he didn't step away. She cares that you're here. You want to know her. Get on the floor. Claire blinked. What? Get on the floor. He pointed to the spot next to Maya. Your suit is going to get wrinkled. You might get cheese dust on your cuffs, but she's right there. Claire looked at the floor. She looked at her custom-tailored suit. She took a slow, shuddering breath. She kicked off her heels. They clattered against the tile. Slowly, awkwardly, the billionaire CEO lowered herself down until she was sitting cross-legged on the heated floor next to her 6-year-old daughter. Maya looked at her cautiously. Then she picked up her bowl and held it out. Do you want some? Maya asked. Daddy made it. It's the magic dust kind. Claire looked at the neon orange slop. A small, genuine, broken smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. I would love some, Claire said softly. She took the plastic spoon Maya offered. She took a bite. She closed her eyes, swallowing the cheap, salty pasta. When she opened them, a single tear slipped down her cheek, catching in the harsh overhead lights. Alfred leaned against the counter, watching them. The ghost was gone. The machine was broken. They were finally bleeding onto the pristine floors, and it was the best thing that had happened since they arrived. Midnight. The estate was completely silent again, but tonight, the silence didn't feel like a vacuum. It felt like a pause. Alfred was sitting on the back terrace. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp grass and the faint metallic tang of the city miles away in the distance. The security lights cast long, pale shadows across the manicured lawns. Somewhere in the dark, men with earpieces were patrolling the perimeter. He could feel their presence, a low-voltage current of paranoia, but he didn't let it consume him. The glass door slid open with a soft shh. Claire stepped out. She had changed into loose grey sweatpants and an oversized college t-shirt, one he recognized from 10 years ago. It had holes in the collar. She was carrying a bottle of amber liquid and 2 heavy crystal tumblers. She set the glasses on the wrought iron table and poured. The liquid sloshed heavily. "Macallan 25, she said, handing him a glass. "A peace offering. I prefer draft beer in a dirty glass, but I'll make an exception," he muttered, taking the tumbler. The crystal felt cold and heavy in his hand. Claire sat down in the chair next to him, pulling her knees up to her chest. They sat in silence for a long time, sipping the scotch. It burned on the way down, a sharp, complex heat that settled in his chest. "She fell asleep holding my hand," Claire said into the dark. Her voice was raw, stripped of its boardroom armor. "I read her a story about a badger. She corrected my voices. Apparently, I make the badger sound too corporate." Alfred snorted, leaning his head back against the cold iron of the chair. "Yeah, well, you have a very authoritative baseline. The badger needs to be a little more neurotic." Claire laughed. It was a genuine, tired sound. It felt like finding a relic from a past life. "I'm sorry, Alfred," she said. The laugh faded, replaced by a heavy, grounding sincerity. "About today, about the chef, about trying to manage you two like assets. It's a reflex. It kept me alive while I was tearing down the men who tried to hurt us. But it's toxic here. I see that now." Alfred swirled the scotch in his glass, watching the amber liquid catch the security lights. "You can't just flip a switch, Claire. I know that," he said, keeping his gaze forward. "You spent 4 years turning yourself into a weapon so we could have a shield. I get it. But the war is over. If you keep holding the shield up, you're going to crush us against the wall." "I know," she whispered. She sounded incredibly tired. "But I don't know who I am without the armor. If I'm not the architect, if I'm not the CEO, who am I?" "You're Maya's mom," he said simply. "And you're the woman who used to steal my French fries at 2 a.m. Start there." She turned her head to look at him. In the pale light, the sharp angles of her face softened. "And what about you? Who are you now?" That was the question, the one that had been keeping him up at night, more than the soft mattress or the silent AC. "I'm not a kept man," he said, his voice hardening slightly. "I'm not going to wander around this compound waiting for an allowance. I spent 4 years surviving. I need to work. I need to sweat." Claire nodded slowly, expecting this. "You can have any position you want at Omnicorp. You want to run the data division. Done. You want Gregson's old job? It's yours." "No." He shook his head, taking another sip of the scotch. "I don't want your company. I don't want a fake job created to massage my ego." Claire frowned, lowering her glass. "Then what?" "Your foundation, the philanthropic arm. I read the filings while you were at work last week," he said, turning to face her. "It's a mess, Claire. It's a tax shelter run by accountants. It lacks teeth. It lacks dirt." "Dirt?" "Yeah, dirt. You're throwing money at galas and abstract art programs. Let me run it. I want to build subsidized housing that isn't made of lead paint and rot. I want to fund childcare for single parents who are one bad day away from an eviction notice. I know that world, Claire. I lived in it for 4 years. Let me weaponize your money to fix the things that actually break people." Claire stared at him. Her pale eyes widened slightly, absorbing the proposition. The CEO in her was evaluating the logistics, but the woman beneath it was listening to the passion in his voice. "You want full autonomy?" she asked. "Complete autonomy," he replied, holding her gaze. "You fund it, I build it. And if any of your board members try to step in and sanitize my projects, I'll throw them out the window." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Claire's face. It was the smile that used to make rival hedge fund managers sweat through their suits. "You're hired," she said. She held out her crystal tumbler. He clinked his against hers. The sharp ting rang out into the quiet night. "So," he said, leaning back and looking out at the darkened tree line where the invisible guards stood watch. "Where does this leave us, you and me?" Claire looked down at her hands. She traced the rim of her glass with a thumb. "I don't know. We're different people now, Alfred. We have scars. You can't just stitch 4 missing years back together." "No," he agreed softly. "You can't." "But," she added, looking up at him, her eyes reflecting the pale light of the moon, "we are in the same house. We are on the same side. I'd like to try and learn who you are now, if you'll let me." Alfred thought about the smell of stale coffee and industrial bleach. He thought about Gregson's sneer, the cardboard box, and the crushing weight of having exactly $12 to his name. He thought about the 4 black SUVs rolling into the fire lane, and the woman in the white suit who bought a corporation just to fire the man who made his daughter cry. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy. It was built on trauma, paranoia, and neon orange cheese powder. But as he looked at Claire, sitting beside him in the dark, he felt the tight, coiled knot of survival in his chest loosen just a fraction. He didn't have to carry the sky alone anymore. "Okay," he said, his voice barely a whisper against the night air. "We try." He took a final sip of the scotch. The burn was fading, leaving behind a deep, steady warmth. The fortress around them was still heavily armed, still locked tight against the outside world. But for the first time in 4 years, the doors on the inside were finally starting to open. They thought Alfred was just a washed-up, broke single dad they could step on. They didn't know he was holding the leash to the most dangerous woman on Wall Street. Money can't buy happiness, but it can buy a hostile takeover to crush the man who made your child cry. If Alfred and Claire's messy, raw journey from the bottom of the barrel to a billionaire's fortress kept you hooked, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who loves a ruthless comeback, and subscribe to the channel for more deeply human stories of revenge and redemption.